My husband's funeral was not over yet, and already the sound of sirens tore through the silence that should have been reserved for grief. I was 58 years old that morning, dressed in black with my hair pinned up in the same way I had worn it when I first married him. The neighbors had lined up along the driveway, watching from a distance as if our tragedy had become some kind of morbid theater. I wanted to collapse into the ground, to disappear into the earth with my husband. But instead, I stood frozen on the porch as my son pulled the police car to the front door. The sight burned into me more sharply than the burial itself. Because funerals are for endings, but that moment felt like the start of something crueler, darker, and far more permanent. I suppose I should tell you who I am. I'm a mother, a widow, a woman who has lived her entire life in the shadows of duty and silence. My name doesn't matter as much as my story, though I will tell you this. I gave everything I had to my family. I raised 2 children, 1 son, 1 daughter, and I stayed married for 36 years to a man who, despite his faults, was my anchor in a world that often wanted to pull me under. I sacrificed my career, my independence, and parts of myself I can never get back. And for what? To stand there on my porch, black dress clinging to my bones, while my only son summoned the police against me on the very day we were supposed to bury his father. I can't even say I didn't see it coming. That would be a lie, and lies have already poisoned enough of this story. The truth is, there had been cracks for years, subtle betrayals, whispered arguments, unsigned papers hidden in drawers. But I never thought my son would stand against me so openly, so brutally, when I was already bent with grief. The police stepped out of the car, 2 officers in stiff uniforms, their eyes scanning the house like it was already a crime scene. My neighbor's whispers grew louder. I clutched the railing with both hands, fighting the dizziness. I wanted to scream at my son. How dare you? How dare you do this to me, today, of all days? But my voice stayed trapped inside me, too strangled by disbelief to find its way out. Instead, he spoke first. His words weren't meant just for me. They were meant for everyone listening, for the entire neighborhood, for the officers taking notes with clipped pens. "She's hiding something," he declared. "Dad didn't die the way it looks." My knees buckled. The ground beneath me wavered. I wanted to believe it was just the weight of grief, but no. This was betrayal. The kind you don't recover from. The kind that slices deeper than any death. You have to understand, my husband was no saint. He was stern, often distant, a man who believed that providing money excused him from providing warmth. Yet in his own way, he loved me. In his final years, as sickness ate away at his body, he clung to me like I was the only safe place left in the world. And I was. I nursed him, bathed him, spoon-fed him soup when his hands trembled too much to hold a spoon. I whispered prayers into the dark when he groaned through the night. I was there for every breath of his suffering. And then, on the morning of his burial, my son accused me of murder. It wasn't only the accusation, it was the look in his eyes. Cold, certain, almost hungry for my downfall. He wanted the police to find me guilty. He wanted the world to see me in chains. And the officers, though polite, took his side just by showing up. They asked me questions in front of my neighbors. Did I give my husband too much medication? Did we argue that night? Was there life insurance money? Every question was a knife twisting deeper into my already shattered chest. I didn't answer them right away. I couldn't. My mind wasn't even in that moment. It was spiraling back through the years, trying to piece together when my son had become my enemy. I remembered his first steps, his laugh that used to bubble like sunlight, the way he once clung to my leg when strangers scared him. How had that little boy, turned into the man who dragged police to my door while his father's coffin was still lowered in the ground. And then I remembered something else, something buried, something I had tried so hard to forget. My husband once confessed to me, in one of his last moments of lucidity, that our son knew more than he should. He didn't say exactly what, but his eyes filled with a dread I'd never seen in him before. He grabbed my wrist and whispered, "He'll use it against you." Be careful, I had brushed it off at the time, thinking he was delirious from the morphine. But now, watching my son smirk as the officers scribbled notes, I realized it hadn't been delirium at all. It had been a warning. The day dragged on like a slow-motion nightmare. The funeral was reduced to a backdrop, a formality nobody cared about anymore. My daughter stood by me, trembling, her hand clutching mine so tightly that I could feel the pulse in her fingers. She whispered, "Mom, don't say anything. Don't give them what they want." But her voice shook with fear, and I knew she doubted me too. That cut deeper than any question the police could ask. The officers didn't arrest me that day. They said they needed to investigate, that they would be back with more questions. But the damage was already done. The seed of suspicion had been planted, watered by my son's venom, and it grew fast. Faster than grief, faster than healing. By evening, whispers turned into rumors, and rumors into judgment. The neighbors wouldn't look me in the eye. My phone rang with calls from relatives asking if it was true, if I had killed my husband for money. That night, alone in my bedroom, I stared at the empty space beside me where my husband used to sleep. I whispered into the silence, asking him if he knew what his son had done, if he saw how he had turned against me. I begged him for a sign, for anything to help me fight back. But the only response was the creaking of the old house settling into itself, indifferent to my pain. In that moment, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel yet. Not just grief, not just betrayal, but rage, a fire that burned beneath the tears, hotter than despair, sharper than sorrow. My son wanted to destroy me, but he had underestimated the strength of a woman who had already survived too much to ever go down quietly. And so I began to plot. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. If he wanted war, he would have it. If he wanted the truth, then I would drag it out of the shadows, no matter how ugly it was. Because there were secrets in this family. Secrets buried deeper than coffins. Secrets that would make my son regret ever pulling that police car to my door. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with my eyes wide open, watching the thin lines of moonlight crawl across the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day like a film I couldn't turn off. The police car pulling up, my son's voice, sharp with accusation, the officer's questions, my neighbor's stares. It felt like the entire world had shifted under my feet, and I was standing on quicksand, sinking slowly while everyone else just watched. By dawn, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for the whispers to eat me alive. I wasn't going to let my son dictate my story. If he wanted a battle, then I would arm myself with the only weapon I had left. The truth. Even if it destroyed what was left of this family, even if it burned every bridge I had spent decades building, I would not be buried under lies. The first place I went wasn't the police station. It wasn't even a lawyer's office. It was the attic, that dusty, forgotten space above our home where boxes of the past sat untouched for years. I climbed the creaky ladder with my hands trembling, not from age, but from the weight of what I suspected I might find. My husband had been a secretive man. He had file folders for everything, insurance, bank accounts, deeds. But there were always certain papers he kept hidden, places he didn't want me to look. I used to respect that, chalk it up to his private nature. But as I rifled through those boxes, sneezing at the dust, I realized respect had blinded me. I found it in a manila envelope, thick, heavy, almost groaning under the burden of its contents. My hand shook as I pulled it open. Inside were documents, life insurance policies, bank statements, letters I had never seen before. And then, near the bottom, a single folded page with handwriting I recognized immediately. My husband's. It was a confession. Not in the legal sense, not signed or notarized, but in a shaky, uneven scrawl, a desperate attempt to unburden himself before death. He wrote about debts, not just financial debts, but debts of blood. Words like favor and threat appeared again and again. He wrote about a deal made long before I ever knew him, something involving his brother, money that disappeared, promises he couldn't keep. And then the most devastating line of all. Our son knows. He thinks he can fix what I broke, but it will destroy her. I stared at those words until they blurred. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. So it was true. My husband had known our son carried knowledge like a blade, ready to cut me open with it. I wanted to scream, to rip the paper into shreds, but I forced myself to be still. This wasn't just pain. It was power, evidence, proof that my son wasn't the hero he painted himself to be, but an opportunist waiting for his moment to strike. I put everything back into the envelope, tucked it under my coat, and descended the attic ladder as if I were carrying dynamite. My heart pounded in my ears. I didn't know yet how I would use it, or when, but I knew I had to be careful, because secrets, once exposed, can't be contained again. By the time the police returned 2 days later, I was ready. They came with more questions, their voices polite but edged with suspicion. My son stood smugly at the doorway, arms crossed, watching me like a hunter who had already trapped his prey. My daughter hovered behind me, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously between us. The officers asked again about the night of my husband's death. What medication I had given him. How much? If there were witnesses. I answered calmly, evenly, though inside I was burning. And when they asked about the life insurance, I didn't flinch. Yes, I said, there is a policy. But if you're looking for motive, maybe you should look at who else had access to him in those final weeks. My son's head snapped toward me. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. I didn't elaborate then. I didn't need to. I wanted the seed of doubt to grow in them, just as his accusations had grown in the neighborhood. I wanted him to know I wasn't defenseless. After they left, he confronted me. His voice was low, almost a growl. "What are you playing at, Mom?" I met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "What are you playing at? Dragging police here when your father's body wasn't even cold." His lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile. "You wouldn't understand. Dad owed things, promises, and now it's on me to clean up the mess. But don't worry, I'll make sure I get what I deserve." The words chilled me, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. He wasn't after justice. He was after inheritance, after money, after whatever power my husband's unfinished business had left dangling. He was willing to sacrifice me for it, to paint me as the villain if it meant stepping into a throne of ashes. That night, I called my daughter into my room. I closed the door, locked it, and handed her the envelope I had found in the attic. Her hands trembled as she read. Tears welled in her eyes. "Mom," he knew. Dad knew all along. Why didn't he tell us? "Because he thought it would break us apart," I whispered. And he was right. But it's too late now. We're already broken. She clutched my hand. "What are we going to do?" For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like hope. Not because I had a plan, but because I wasn't alone. My daughter still believed me, still stood beside me, and that meant everything. Over the next week, the house became a battlefield of silence. My son avoided me, but I could feel his hatred simmering in every glance, every slammed door. My daughter stayed close, whispering that we would get through it, that the truth would come out. But I knew this was just the beginning. The police investigation dragged on. Neighbors gossiped. Friends drifted away, unwilling to be caught in the scandal. Every day felt like a trial without a courtroom, and yet, Beneath the fear and exhaustion, my rage grew sharper, harder, like steel being forged in fire, because I knew something my son didn't. I knew that the truth in that envelope was only part of the story. There were more secrets, deeper ones, buried not just in papers but in memories, in actions, in the very foundation of this family. And if I could uncover them, if I could shine a light on the darkness my husband left behind, then maybe, just maybe, I could turn this betrayal into my vengeance. So I started digging into old letters, bank records, conversations I'd once brushed off as meaningless. Every thread I pulled revealed another knot, another hidden truth. And slowly, a picture began to emerge, one that would change everything I thought I knew about my husband, my son, and even myself. And when I finally saw the full picture, I realized with a shiver that the funeral had been just the beginning. The real story hadn't even started yet. The more I uncovered, the less I recognized the life I had lived for nearly 4 decades. It was like peeling back the wallpaper in an old house, only to discover rot crawling through the walls. My husband, the man I had devoted my youth and strength to, had lived a life woven with secrets, debts, and betrayals I had been too trusting or too blind to see. I started with his bank records. Late at night, while the house slept or pretended to, I sat at the dining table with stacks of papers spread out like a battlefield. The numbers didn't add up. For years, he had been siphoning money into accounts I didn't know existed. Some were small, almost like breadcrumbs left to distract me, but others were enormous, sitting in names I didn't recognize. And yet, my son's signature appeared alongside his on more than one document. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just my husband's sin. My son had been involved long before his father's death. The realization cut me open. While I had been cooking dinners, folding laundry, and caring for the man who was dying, they had been conspiring together, building a world that excluded me entirely. And now, with my husband gone, my son was trying to erase me altogether. But betrayal rarely hides in just one corner. The deeper I dug, the more I found threads leading elsewhere. Letters addressed to my husband from a woman whose name I didn't recognize. Words like repayment, agreement, and collateral. I stared at those letters until the edges blurred, trying to imagine who she was. A creditor? An accomplice? A lover? My hands trembled, but I forced myself to keep reading. Because knowledge, no matter how painful, was my only weapon. My daughter noticed my sleepless nights, the shadows under my eyes. One evening, she brought me tea and sat beside me in silence, until finally she whispered, "Mom, you don't have to carry this alone." I looked at her, my only anchor in a storm that threatened to swallow me whole. If I don't, who will? Your brother isn't fighting for us. He's fighting for himself. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Then let me fight with you. It was the first time in weeks that I felt a crack of light in the darkness. Together, we pored over the documents, piecing together the puzzle. The more we learned, the more dangerous the truth became. Because it wasn't just about debts or hidden accounts. It was about betrayal on a scale I hadn't dared imagine. And then came the night that changed everything. I woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs. Heavy, deliberate, not the quiet shuffle of someone going for water in the middle of the night. My daughter was asleep in the next room, and I knew instantly who it was. My son. I crept down the stairs, my heart thundering. In the dim glow of the kitchen light, I saw him rifling through the very envelope I had hidden in the cabinet behind the dishes. He had found it. Or maybe he had always known it was there. "What are you doing?" My voice cracked through the silence like a whip. He froze, then slowly turned toward me. His face was twisted with something darker than anger, something closer to triumph. "Taking back what's mine." "That doesn't belong to you," I snapped, my hand shaking. "Those are your father's secrets, not trophies for you to claim." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You still don't get it, do you? Dad owed people, dangerous people. He promised them things, land, money, favors. And when he couldn't pay, he left it on me. You think I'm doing this to hurt you?" "No, Mom," I'm doing this to survive." My breath caught. "By destroying me?" "By removing the weakest link," he said coldly. "Do you know what happens if they find out you've been digging through this? Do you know what happens if they think you know too much?" His words chilled me. I realized then that this wasn't just a family betrayal. This was bigger. My husband had entangled us in something dangerous enough to outlive him, and now my son had chosen to stand with the shadows instead of the light. I stepped closer, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "If you hand me over, if you let them come for me, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Because blood doesn't wash off no matter how much money you earn. And betrayal? It carves itself into your soul until you don't even recognize your own reflection." For a moment, his jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with something almost human, hesitation, maybe even guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He stuffed the papers back into the envelope, shoved it under his arm, and stormed past me without another word. The door slammed behind him, leaving me shaking in the empty kitchen. The next morning, the police returned. But this time, they weren't just asking questions. They had a warrant. They tore through the house, rifling through drawers, overturning boxes, pulling apart the life I had built piece by piece. And at the center of it all was my son, arms folded, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He had handed me over, but what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I had already made copies. Every document, every letter, every signature. I had scanned them, saved them, hidden them where he would never think to look. As the officers carried away boxes of my belongings, as neighbors gathered once again to gawk, as my son smirked like he had finally won, I stood still, silent, a storm brewing behind my eyes. Let him think he had destroyed me. Let him believe I was beaten. Because when the time came, I would reveal everything. And when I did, the world would see who he truly was. But until then, I had to endure the humiliation, the whispers, the loneliness that wrapped itself around me like chains. I had to live each day under suspicion, each night under threat, while my son grew bolder, more reckless, convinced of his victory. What he didn't understand was that betrayal has a way of circling back, that the very lies he built his power on would become the foundation of his downfall. And I would be the one to bring it crashing down. The weeks that followed were a blur of interrogations, loneliness, and silent tears spilled onto my pillow. The police called me in for questioning again and again. Each time I walked into that sterile room, I felt like a ghost of myself, frail, hollow-eyed, a widow fighting not only grief but the weight of suspicion. My son never attended those sessions. He didn't need to. He had already planted the poison, and now he just sat back and watched it spread. But what no one realized was that I was playing a longer game. Every night, when I came home exhausted, I forced myself to sit down with my daughter and plan. We whispered in hushed tones at the kitchen table, mapping out every thread of this tangled web. I showed her the copies I had made, the trail of bank accounts, the letters that hinted at more than just financial debt. Each discovery deepened our horror, but also steeled our resolve. One night, my daughter looked at me with fire in her eyes. "Mom, we can't just survive this. We have to fight back. He's trying to erase you, and I won't let him." Her words were like oxygen to a drowning woman. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the truth, for her, for the memory of the family we once were before greed and secrets devoured us. The turning point came when I received an anonymous letter in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line. "He's meeting them on Thursday. If you want proof, be there." My hand shook as I held it. I knew instantly who he was. My son. And I knew this was the opportunity I had been waiting for. Proof, not just of my innocence, but of his betrayal. Thursday came heavy with dread. My daughter begged me not to go, but I couldn't stay away. If I missed this chance, I might never get another. So I dressed in plain clothes, pulled my coat tight, and drove to the address scribbled on the note. A rundown warehouse on the edge of town. I parked far enough away to stay hidden, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Through the cracked windows of the building, I saw them. My son and two men whose faces I didn't recognize. They were large, rough-looking, the kind of men whose silence spoke of violence. My son was talking fast, gesturing with his hands, trying to sound confident, but his body betrayed him, his shoulders stiff, his eyes darting nervously. I strained to hear, pressing myself against the cold brick wall outside. Snippets of conversation floated through the cracks, words like payment, deadline, insurance, inheritance. And then, the knife to my heart. She'll be out of the way soon. Then, everything's mine. I nearly collapsed right there on the sidewalk. My own son. Plotting my erasure not just from our home, but from existence. I stumbled back to my car, clutching my chest, fighting for air. The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical, sharp as though a hand were squeezing my heart. I sat in the driver's seat for what felt like hours, shaking, weeping, trying to reconcile the little boy I once rocked to sleep with the man conspiring against me now. But alongside the grief came something stronger. Resolve. If he wanted me gone, he would have to face the truth first. And the truth was more damning than anything he could fabricate. The next day, I went to the police. Not the officers who had hounded me before, but a detective I trusted, someone I knew from years back when my husband had worked at the mill. I laid out everything. The copies of the documents, the letters, the recordings I had secretly made of my son's threats, and now the anonymous note. The detective listened quietly, his brow furrowed deeper with each piece of evidence I laid down. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. This is bigger than we thought. If what you're saying is true, your husband was involved with organized crime, and your son. He's trying to step into his shoes. I nodded, my hands trembling. But he's framing me. He's turning everyone against me. I can't survive this alone. He gave me a long look. You won't have to. We'll investigate. But you need to be careful. If he's willing to go this far, he won't stop easily. Careful. That word echoed in my mind like a warning bell. The following week felt like waiting for a storm to break. My son prowled around the house with a smugness that made my skin crawl. He thought he had won. He thought the whispers, the police raids, the neighbors' judgment had broken me, and I let him think that. I smiled when he sneered, stayed silent when he taunted me, all the while knowing that the noose he was tightening around my neck was slowly coiling around his own. It was a Sunday morning. The church bells had just finished ringing when the knock came at the door. This time it wasn't two uniformed officers. It was a team of detectives, their badges flashing, their voices stern. They asked for my son by name. He laughed when they said it. Actually laughed. You've got the wrong person, he said confidently, gesturing toward me. She's the one you want. She killed him. But then the detective laid the folder on the table. My folder. My evidence. The documents, the letters, the recordings. His smile faltered, then collapsed altogether. The room spun into chaos. Questions shouted, my son's protests growing more desperate, my daughter's sobs breaking through the tension. And me? I sat in silence, my hands folded in my lap, tears streaming down my cheeks. Not from sadness this time, from vindication. They let him out in handcuffs. My neighbors, once so quick to whisper, now stood in stunned silence as he was shoved into the back of the police car. The same car he had once brought to my door, thinking it would end me. I watched from the porch, black dress still hanging in my closet from the funeral, my heart heavy but steady. Justice had come, though it didn't feel like victory. It felt like ashes, bitter, choking, a reminder that even when the truth wins, it doesn't restore what was lost. Because I had lost my son long before those handcuffs. I had lost him to greed, to pride, to a legacy of shadows my husband left behind. And though I had survived, though I had cleared my name, The wound of his betrayal would never truly heal. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I thought of my husband's last warning. He'll use it against you. Be careful. And I realized too late that he had been right. My son had used it, and it had nearly destroyed me. But in the end, it destroyed him instead. The story should end there, neatly tied with justice. But life doesn't work that way. The scars remain. The silence in this house is heavier than ever. My daughter stays close, but I see the fear in her eyes. Fear that betrayal might be contagious, that darkness runs in our blood. All I can do now is tell my story, raw and unvarnished, so that maybe someone else will see the warning signs before it's too late. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from those we love, those we trust, those we would lay down our lives for. And when it does, it cuts deeper than any blade. So if you're listening to me now, I beg you, cherish the ones who stand by you, and never, ever ignore the cracks in the foundation of your family. Because one day those cracks might widen into chasms you can never cross. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And leave me a comment about what you think. Your words matter more than you know, and maybe together we can turn pain into something meaningful.